Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Major rumours emerging today as to the future of Daniel Ricciardo in this sport. After a poor start to the season with respect to Yuki Tsunoda, it appears Red Bull no longer see Ricciardo as the man to partner Verstappen once again in that Red Bull car. That means more than likely RB will move on from Ricciardo at some point in the near future. He may though even get less time than Nick De Vries did last year. Rumour has it there's an ultimatum that's been given to Ricciardo: improve over the next 2 races or you might be out of the car for Liam Lawson as soon as Miami in just 3 races time. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Of course, lots to say on yesterday's Grand Prix as well with regard to the driver market. Carlos Sainz does not have a drive for next year as it stands. That will very quickly change, I imagine, and you've got to look at Red Bull as one of the teams that may very well be considering putting a Sainz-Verstappen partnership together, assuming Verstappen stays and all the drama at Red Bull doesn't result in a Verstappen departure, which is definitely not out of the realms of possibility, as we've discussed over the last couple of weeks. But if you are looking at a former driver partnership teaming up again, Sainz Verstappen makes a lot more sense than Ricciardo Verstappen as it presently stands. As Sainz did after winning the Grand Prix, hope I get a drive for next year. Sainz is a very good driver, arguably a great driver. Is he as good as Leclerc in my opinion? No. Has he been outperformed by Leclerc on average over the last 10 races? Absolutely yes, but when push comes to shove and the race wins are on the table, it's Sainz that has delivered on both occasions now. Of course, Singapore last year and now here in Australia, but a 1-2 regardless, and Leclerc says yes, many team principals are in talks with Carlos Sainz and he is very confident Sainz will land a top drive. Mercedes makes sense, Red Bull makes sense as well. I don't think that Sainz to Audi really makes much sense for Sainz anymore, because let's be real, he should have better offers out there on the market than that Audi project, as who knows how they're going to do, especially for next year and the year beyond, because it's still Sauber and they're struggling this year. Horner actually said after the Grand Prix, yes, the driver market is very interesting. We've got a great driver here who's just won the race, implying Sainz is at least on Red Bull's target list. Makes a fair bit of sense. Perez's contract ends at the end of this year, and when the car wasn't an absolute rocket ship as it was in Bahrain and Jeddah when Perez secured an easy P2, this race was a very different story, of course. Verstappen retires, all of a sudden, Perez isn't there to pick up the pieces and secure the victory. So I'm sure there's questions of Red Bull. And last year, Perez also had a great start to the season. That fell away relatively swiftly from Miami onwards, and we're going to discuss the importance of Miami here in a couple of seconds. Of course, that's in 3 races time after Japan, China, then I think we go to Miami once again for maybe the last Miami Grand Prix in quite some time, because I think the contract comes to a close. But Sainz to Red Bull would make some degree of sense, but are we putting it past Sainz and Leclerc to both have great results from now to the end of the season? No. Ferrari are looking for more. Fred Vasseur is doing a killer job, isn't he? Everything he's done over the last 18 months has been so impressive to me, and especially given the team that he inherited at the time. Strategy department, they pretty much nailed everything top to bottom as well on the Sunday. There was even talk about Plan A on the radio. Can you believe it? The Plan A, they actually went for it. So Ferrari, they're looking to accelerate their upgrades, bring new parts to Japan. I think they'd planned upgrades for Imola possibly in a few races' time, but there's a chance they can get them in at Japan, because all of a sudden Ferrari are very close to Red Bull in the constructors, and Leclerc is something like 4 points off Verstappen and would have been leading the championship had he won the Grand Prix instead of Sainz. So, you know, I'm not going to say we've got a championship fight on our hands, but I think there will be races this year where Ferrari are actually stronger than Red Bull, and that might have been the case this past weekend. So Vasseur says he's happy with the win, but I want more. Like, we're going to bring the upgrades ASAP and try and chase this performance. Perez was not slow necessarily towards the end of the Grand Prix, if we believe that he had a tear-off in his floor from Alonso's car. Gotta say quickly on these whole tear-off things on the visors, we've got to find a better solution for this. It's been a problem for so long now that they take the tail off the visor because you can't see through it anymore when the dust builds up and stuff. They chuck it out of the car and then, you know, it blocks up brake ducts, it gets stuck on the floor, costs performance. Like, surely they should put it inside the cockpit or something. There's got to be a better solution for this, or just better technology on the way that, I don't know, they interact with the car if they do get picked up. I don't know, but apparently it was costing Perez like 4 tenths in certain ways, and he was about 5 tenths off the pace of the leaders. So I guess if you account for that, and then you say, well, Verstappen will probably have 2 or 3 tenths in hand easily over Perez, then you're looking at Verstappen having the fastest race car on the Sunday in his hands. But then again, were Sainz and Leclerc pushing flat out? No, not necessarily. necessarily. So it's interesting, and it's a shame really we never got to find out whether Verstappen would have been the quickest car and would have won the Grand Prix if not for the issue right at the start of the race, because I genuinely think Ferrari would have at the very least challenged. I think there would have been a race on our hands, and in some ways it kind of robbed the fans of getting to see an actual battle, I think, between Verstappen and the Ferraris for the victory in the Grand Prix. But also for Red Bull it's not ideal because they had tyre degradation issues, surprisingly for Red Bull, and apparently you like circuits like this that work the front tyres harder than the rear tyres that get worked, especially hard around Bahrain, where Red Bull seem to like that a fair bit. This type of circuit doesn't seem to suit their car as well, and Ferrari have some advantages in this situation. And whether Red Bull really did fix their setup for Verstappen on the Sunday, they don't know the answer to that question, to be honest, so it's still something Red Bull will have to figure out going into next Grand Prix and Grand Prix beyond that, whether there actually isn't something they're fully nailing with their car right now, because you're not really going to see that necessarily in the hands of Perez. Now, Marco has no illusions that Max Verstappen will come back and dominate Japan. The car should be unbelievable around there. I'm sure that it will be. Max has absolutely annihilated that Grand Prix for the last couple of years, and I expect that to continue, especially because Max, wants to come with the vengeance and say, okay, all right, whatever, you took my 9-win streak away from me, now let me go and break my own record again type thing. And Marco says, yeah, I think the problems are purely related to this circuit, is nothing special. I expect Verstappen to dominate again in Suzuka. So everyone finds it boring when Red Bull wins, so he delivered for all those people, but not on purpose. So he says that he reckons it's circuit specific, but it's not usually the circuit that Red Bull necessarily struggle at. I mean, Singapore's been a bit of a bogey circuit for many dominant teams over the past few years, so just one to keep your eyes on, especially come a circuit like China or like even Miami, just to see how they do there. I'm sure that Suzuka will be good for them. Max actually apparently was keeping up with Sainz's pace. Now, it's kind of difficult to say because he only had a couple of laps and the car was getting worse and worse. But yeah, Marco says that Max was keeping up with the pace of Sainz at the start relatively easily. If he was able to race, the results were completely different. So tough to say whether he would have won the Grand Prix or not. Maybe we'll find out as the season progresses whether Ferrari can keep up this positive momentum. But I think it is quite clear on Perez's performance that, Perez Verstappen is not the ideal driver lineup. And apparently Christian Horner, the kind of rumours have gone a little bit dry on whether Horner's going to stay or go. There were rumours that he was going to go before Australia. That never happened. My feeling is that there was way more still to come out on this, and this is definitely not the end of the saga, but for now it's died down somewhat, and Horner feels pretty comfortable, I would say, in his role. There is still a possibility, absolutely, that Verstappen would depart Red Bull in the near future if circumstances conspire in that way. Would he leave to join Mercedes, though? Seems kind of unlikely on their recent performances. But regardless of whether Verstappen leaves or not, Horner apparently wants Fernando Alonso in the car. And this is today another Ralph Buck banger that he drops here on F1 Insider. And as I say, I don't know if this is true or not, but obviously we're going to talk about it. He says that Horner is keen to bring Alonso into the team. Obviously, Fernando Alonso would love the opportunity to go into the Red Bull. And this is an interesting point in a way, because the feeling has been that Red Bull might prefer a bit of a, I don't exactly want to call Perez a doormat, but a clear second driver like a Bottas, for example, who is able to maybe be frustrated to be slower, but is able to accept playing second fiddle to Verstappen. You put Fernando in the car, you're going to have a very different story. And look, Fernando, if he goes into that team, he will shake some things up. I think there's no doubt about that, just the way that he is and what we've seen in the past. So you could argue, should that be Red Bull, should that be what Red Bull do? But if Horner wants it to happen, and also you've got to consider, I suppose, that if Verstappen were to leave, then Alonso coming in would make all the sense in the world. And maybe then if Verstappen stays, then sure, maybe reach out to Alonso now, get that deal ongoing, so then whatever happens with Verstappen, it's still an option down the line. So yeah, apparently Alonso is the man to look at. There's of course Sainz as well, there's other options, but we're going to talk about Tsunoda and of course Daniel Ricciardo here in a second, which seems increasingly unlikely on the evidence that potentially Fernando Alonso is in the target sightlines of Red Bull, which means that, yeah, there's even less opportunity, I suppose, for Daniel Ricciardo to make a comeback in this situation. So discussion on that, just scroll through it if you guys want to pause and read. Feel free to do so. A couple of things to say quickly on Mercedes, though, because they're in a right pickle right now. Even their official social media is saying this, updated their profile picture, a smile might be nice. Nothing to smile about in my life, says the Merc admin, and same for Lewis Hamilton. To be fair, he was kind of smiling after the Grand Prix because he was looking at the Ferrari thinking, yep, I've made another banger career decision here. But he says, yeah, what can they improve for next Grand Prix, Mercedes? Nothing. They've just got to keep trying again and seemingly trying some new experimentation, because that's what Toto Wolff says, that they need to experiment every single race, not only on Friday, because our performance seems to get worse throughout the weekends. We are good on Friday, then we are good on some of the sessions on Saturday, but the more grip we have, the faster it goes, the more we reach the performance ceiling of the car. Our data shows that it's not the ceiling. So he has no idea what's going on, Toto, neither do Mercedes, and the implication is that, yeah, unlucky Lewis, and potentially George as well, you are going to be running sensors, you are going to be running experimental setups every single Friday practice, Saturday practice, qualifying and race, just so we can figure out what is going on with our car, and why the car isn't where it needs to be. And Toto says, yeah, we can take some positives, because we managed to rule out some of the reasons that are causing the car to be slow. They had concerns about the suspension, they had concerns about the stiffness of the gearbox carrier, they had concerns about the vibrating steering rack, but all of those problems this weekend disappeared. So great, but also not great, because none of those problems were causing the fundamental issue, which is the car doesn't have enough downforce, especially compared to what it's showing it should have in the simulator. So they still don't know what's going on. They designed these experiments for Australia. Clearly they didn't really work. They had a shocking weekend. The car was slow and they double DNF'd. So it was basically the absolute worst of both worlds. The one positive for Lewis Hamilton at least was that he does get to keep a record, which is most consecutive points finishes. Verstappen secured 43 in a row from basically Australia to Australia from the last couple of years, but not enough to beat Hamilton's record of 48. He wasn't far off actually breaking that. Hamilton himself actually was already on another 24 points finishing streak, but that came to an end, of course, in the Grand Prix as well. He was nearly, adding another tally here to this list. But Hamilton did conclude by saying that it's the worst start to a season that he's ever had, even considering 2009, where he had, I think, 4 points over the first 3 races. But if you translate that into modern day point scoring, I think that would have been 12 points, which is actually more than Hamilton has now. So yeah, it ain't a great start to the year. Also not the great start to the season though for this man. Yuki Tsunoda versus Daniel Ricciardo was a fascinating battle coming into the year, and I've always wondered for some time, what more does Yuki have to do to prove himself as absolutely a Formula 1 caliber driver? He may not be a Red Bull caliber driver for a couple of reasons. His maturity is called into question. He's a feisty driver. I think a lot of people find it very endearing. I really like him for it, and he's obviously quick as well, right? I think people underestimate really how quick Yuki is. You don't always get to see it, I think, in the cars that he drives. But Ricciardo is demolishing him so far this season. Ricciardo was P18 after his lap time deletion in qualifying. Yuki put it into Q3. And Ricciardo even admitted after qualifying that he didn't have the pace. He said that, yeah, even with track evolution, Yuki's lap was not attainable for me. And effectively, the implication was either he's missing something in his setup, or he has to recognise that he just ain't as fast as Yuki Tsunoda right now. And eventually, Yuki gets P7 in the Grand Prix, right? Because of the late Russell crash and the Alonso penalty that puts him up the field even further. Plus 6 points for Yuki so far. Of course, Daniel Ricciardo is still on 0. So Helmut Marko, he loves Yuki, right? We kind of know this. But he also loves Liam Lawson. And this is when, if Marko now feels secure in the team to some degree, and the internal power struggle has calmed down to a certain extent, Marko might still have some degree of domain of control over what happens at the sister team. He likes Tsunoda, he likes Liam Lawson. He's not a big fan of Daniel Ricciardo, really. That's Christian Horner's favourite guy, obviously, right? So, that's why there's always these interesting internal dynamics. But Marko says Tsunoda ran perfectly from the first lap on Friday and set very consistent and good lap times in today's race. When Hülkenberg attacked, he immediately countered. I think we've already confirmed Yuki is an absolutely mature driver. He also said, a very satisfying result, he has the speed. So, lots of positive words here from Marko, but also the other way around here for Daniel Ricciardo, because Marko says, yeah, he's struggling, seems to be failing to adapt to the VCARB 01 in a similar way to what happened at McLaren. Is he past it? I mean, let's be honest, the evidence points in that direction, right? And it's difficult to imagine where Ricciardo precisely is going to go from here. There's also talk as well that Tsunoda's being noticed on the driver market and other teams are starting to pay attention. Certainly, I think Aston Martin, this will be interesting. Let's say Aramco do take over that team. They've got the full Honda partnership. That's a relationship that Yuki Tsunoda has. That might make sense, especially if, in that scenario, let's say Alonso goes to Red Bull, maybe Verstappen even goes to Aston. We've talked about that, but, we'll see on that one. But if Stroll was to go because the Saudis basically taken over, maybe that would make sense. Other teams I'm sure would also be interested. Red Bull just don't seem to be. I don't think that Red Bull really see Tsunoda as their type of guy. I'd love to see him get the chance, but I kind of agree, and I see where Red Bull are coming from in terms of maybe that's not the best appointment. But clearly Yuki is doing everything that he is being asked to do over the last couple of years since Gasly has left, and I think Gasly, very underrated driver in his own regard. And Tsunoda was, early careers, and he's obviously got faster over time as well. But he's done everything he needs to do over the last couple of years. He's, demolished Nick de Vries. He beat Liam Lawson while he was racing against him. Liam Lawson was very good, but Tsunoda beat him over those races, and he's pretty much demolishing Ricciardo so far this season. Marco says he is struggling. We'll have to see. There were some good signs at the test in Bahrain, but he needs a car that is safe and confident. I hope the team will give it to him so he can at least be on par with Yuki, but that is not happening as it stands. Even to slightly rub salt in the wounds, although I guess this would be expected, Ayumu Iwasa, so Red Bull junior driver, will drive an FP1 in Japan. Of course, Japanese driver. Yuki, they're not going to take Yuki out of the car because he's Japanese driver as well. So, it makes sense that Ricciardo would go, but still, right, on a day where there's rumours as to Ricciardo's future, the very next session, he's not in the car because they're putting Ayumu Iwasa in instead. At a time where it feels like maybe Visa Cash App RB need to get back to being a bit more of a rookie-led team for Red Bull rather than keeping an arguably past it Ricciardo in the car that is great for the marketing budget and everything like that, but is maybe not, there's probably better drivers out there, right, that could come into Ricciardo's seat right now and do a better job, as unfortunate as that is to say, given, Ricciardo's a phenomenal driver, like, such an exciting driver to watch, but he's not the same guy anymore, and I think that everyone kind of realises that. Even Christian Horner probably realises that, to be perfectly honest. So, the New Zealand Herald. Now, we've got to say, first of all, the Kiwis, right, New Zealand, Liam Lawson is from New Zealand, so it's probably understandable why they're trying to push this idea. So whether you think these sources are legitimate or not, that's a matter for debate, but it is said that Daniel Ricciardo has been given an ultimatum by Red Bull that if he fails to improve over the next 2 races, Lawson will be back in the car to replace him for the rest of the season. So that would mean, actually, yeah, De Vries would last longer, but that's what they say. Dr. Helmut Marko, a known admirer of Lawson's, has given an ultimatum to Ricciardo to say, hey, improve in Japan or China, or Red Bull will perform a swap that sees Lawson in the car. We know how brutal Red Bull tend to be with their driver lineups, and could you see this as a possibility? I think it's definitely not out of the realms of possibility. We saw last season rumours that Ricciardo was going to be joining, Red Bull instead of Perez if Perez underperformed. Now it's talk about Ricciardo gone and Lawson in. Now, Thomas Maho's been shutting down a lot of rumours over the last couple of weeks where he says that, as far as he is aware, this isn't happening, and that Lawson's own management have no idea where this came from, and they had apparently had not any contact about this. Now, not necessarily saying they would have done if this even is true, so, look at it either way. It may be true, it may not be true, some are saying it's true, some are saying it's not true, but is it plausible? Yes, right. To happen this soon into the season would be, I suppose, unlikely, and be pretty bad, but if you look at the average qualifying positions, Yuki's at 9th, Ricciardo's at 15th so far on average, so that's just the comparison there. And also, just to note, this was Nick de Vries versus Yuki last year. So Yuki only got a couple of points in what was a dreadful AlphaTauri really at the start of the season, but he had loads of P11s, loads of P10s, and de Vries was qualifying further down. Obviously, a couple of DNFs, for example, the crash in Azerbaijan was not good at all. Canada, he had a shocker, and I don't really know what Red Bull were thinking putting de Vries in the car. I guess the theory was, well, Dutch driver, maybe he can be the partner to Verstappen. I don't really think, true wheel knowers thought that was actually a good idea, to be fair. But they gave him 10 races. I think it was 10 races, maybe 11 races. But I think this was his run, really. He got the 10 races, and then he got kicked out of the car after Yuki pretty much beat him every single week in qualifying and the Grand Prix, and then they got rid of him. They brought Daniel Ricciardo in, and then, funny as it is, really, his countryman, Oscar Piastri, crashed in Zandvoort. That led to Ricciardo crashing. That led to Ricciardo fracturing his wrist or whatever it was. And then Liam Lawson gets the drive for a couple of races, very much impresses, knocks Verstappen out of qualifying famously in Singapore. And then Liam Lawson shows that, yeah, he's very much ready for that seat. And we've seen Behrman, obviously, last time out in Jeddah, with a very impressive drive in Sainz's car, showing that many of these rookie drivers are absolutely of the caliber to step into Formula One and do a great job. So what do you guys think about this in the comment section below? Do you buy the idea that Ricciardo is going to be out of the team in the very near future? What are RB going to do about it? To me, the idea that he's just getting China and Japan, they're going to get rid of him for Miami, feels a bit too soon. I wouldn't be surprised if they're considering it, but I would be surprised if Ricciardo goes after like 5 races. I feel like then at least give him half the season, I would say. But at the end of the day, if they've made up their minds that Ricciardo is no longer the man to partner Verstappen at Red Bull, or even to go to the Red Bull seat in general because he's not good enough anymore, then, you know, what's the purpose of him being in the team? There's no development happening there. If anything, it's straight up regression. Unless RB are such a marketing engine that they want to keep Danny just for the sake of him being a valuable brand asset. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.